So after I came out the theater, I was doing a debrief with my parents and my best friend, and my mom was like, okay, so can somebody tell me how being a vampire who can never feel the warmth of the sun again be better than like being alive and black? And I responded with something along the lines of, I mean, you'll still be black, but you'll have a power that you were never afforded previously. And that is the plot of Interview with the Vampire 2022. And I added the Interview with the Vampire part as like a throwaway thought slash joke. And then I was like, hold on. That is part of the plot of Interview with the Vampire 2022. And my best friend Lauren, who had also watched the show, she mentioned that she noticed a parallel with the Smokestack twins and the DuPont Dulac brothers with the last sunrise that they experienced. And I was like, oh my God, you're so right. So yeah, I was like, other than the black vampirism aspect of these respective stories, they're really intertwined in terms of their themes and even characterizations. If you're unfamiliar with the 2022 television adaptation of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, it's sort of a reworking slash reimagining of the novel by the same name. To say that this show is ambitious is like the most massive understatement of all time, but it's truly a work to behold. So basically, it jumps back and forth between present day and the early 20th century, and it follows Louis Dupont Dulac, who is the vampire that's being interviewed. A lot happens, but bare bones version of it all is that Louis is a black Creole proprietor who runs various businesses in this place called Storyville, and he meets this blonde-bobbed bisexual Frenchman named Lestat. Now, Lestat's a vampire, and he's also very into Louis, and wouldn't you know it, Louis also very into Lestat, and they kick up this relationship that spans over a century. Lestat turns Louis into a vampire, and they start this very dysfunctional family, and the show covers all of it from Louis' POV. A fun aspect of this show is that it emphasizes unreliable narration. And when I tell you that when this show was on, people were going to war over what was true versus what was not. So, like, if you're really into toxic fandom discourse, like that, tune in. Anyways, yeah, like I said, very bare bones version. But I'll be going into depth about certain aspects of parts of this series. So if you want a fuller picture, you should definitely check the show out because it's so good. And the pilot episode and episode 5 of the second season are some of my favorite episodes of television, period. So.
You are so boring!
And here come the drums.
Colorless!
Up the
flavorless!
Down this road.
Dull.
Into the heart and off
Dull.
the fingers, feet.
Dull
and
nights.
wallowing brain.
Dull weeks. Dull months. Dull as fuck! Suffocation by the world's softest, beigest pillow.
Louis is played by Jacob Anderson, who is absolutely incredible in this role. Louis Dupont Dulac is oftentimes a very frustrating character, specifically because of how he deals with certain aspects of his relationship with Claudia, his sister slash daughter. But Anderson plays him flawlessly. There's a scene in the first episode in which Louis is grappling with the death of his brother Paul, his complicated relationship with his family, his life as a businessman, and his queerness. He goes to confess his sins, which leads to this scene.
I shamed my father. I failed my brother.
No, son.
I lost my mother and sister, and rather than fix it like a man should, Lord, I run like a coward. I run to the bottle, I run to the grift, I run to bad beds. I lay down with a man. I lay down with the devil.
The religious elements of Interview with the Vampire are oftentimes overshadowed by other more pertinent elements, but its presence is undeniable throughout much of the show. Here, Louis is effectively attempting to rid himself of Lestat's presence. After all, he goes to confess because he can't escape Lestat's loquacious tendencies. That man will literally not leave him alone, and it's all very intentional on Lestat's part, but we're going to get to that a little later when we talk about Remick. And it's no use really because Lestat and Louis wed in that same church that Louis sought to escape in. The church is always going to be a dichotomous thing in the context of vampirism. For Sammy, the church was a shackle. It was his father's attempt to have him denounce the blues, which was sinner's music. And the whole time I was sitting in that theater, I was like, I could really talk about Let It Shine and the parallels here, but I'm not going to do that. But for Louis, the church was a source of penance, and it was an attempt for him to rid himself of his failings, even though he truly didn't believe in what Christianity represented, especially since that religion told him that his nature is that of sin. It's kind of like a veil that he wanted to wear, to like shield himself from the truth of the matter and what he wanted to be comforted by. That's why I love episode 3 being titled "Is My Very Nature That of the Devil?" It's a question that Louis asks, and it's so layered. Because what are we talking about? Are we talking about the vampirism, or are we talking about the queerness? The same question can actually be applied to the Smokestack twins too. Their family reputation precedes them so much so that people believe them to be born sinners, assuming their fates long before they started robbing other folk and working for the mob. But we'll talk about them more in a second. In Sinners, we don't meet Remick, the Irish-American vampire played by a very charismatic Jack O'Connell, until well into the movie. His introduction is one of my favorite things ever, I swear. Remick is very complex and he's very opportunistic, much like Lestat, who's played by Sam Reed. I don't think I mentioned that before. And Sam Reed absolutely tears this role up. My God, he's so good. They both have their own history with vampirism and their reasons for preying on Sammy and Louis respectively, but the most glaring parallel between the two is how they both offer up vampirism as a viable alternative to escaping the shackles of being a mortal black man in a white supremacist world. It's fascinating because they're not offering it out in terms of freeing them from the world of racism, but rather offering them power to make it a little more survivable. But of course, it's always at a cost. Remick warns the crew and Sinners about the KKK in tandem with offering to turn them, because to him, being able to get shot and survive, or being able to endure massive amounts of violence and walk it off, would be invaluable as a black person who's always the target of such violence. And it only comes at the low price of surrendering your soul to him. Nothing is out of kindness and everything is transactional. Remick wants Sammy's musical abilities for himself, and that in itself is wildly complex because both of them are suffering under what colonialism did to each of their respective cultures. Still, Remick turns into the oppressive force that he himself despised. It continues the very cycle that he fell victim to. Lestat is cut from a very similar cloth. In the same way that Remick approached the crew and Sinners, Lestat uses this distinctly performative allyship to signal to Louis that he isn't like those other whites. And Louis believes him.
Cat with some white man out here.
He ain't white, he French.
Oh, that's a new kind of white, is it?
I mean, Lestat literally says this to Louis upon their meeting.
And the women, all shades of skin. White, black, cinnamon.
The racial aspect of Interview with the Vampire is, to me, the defining element of season 1, and it makes the vampiric dynamic that much more messy and turbulent between Lestat and Louis. Like I mentioned for Remick, he perpetuates an oppressive cycle in pursuit of connecting with his ancestors again. Lestat does the same in a butchered attempt to keep Louis by his side. In episode 7 of season 1 of Interview with the Vampire, Lestat physically abuses Louis and his daughter/sister Claudia after feeling like Louis was going to abandon him in favor of running away with Claudia to have a life without him. We later learned that Lestat too was abused and that his actions were a result of that. And it all really just starts to feel like a snake eating its own tail, because from there, the cycle of violence and abuse is just like, it just keeps going. Both Remick and Lestat are fantastic characterizations of a white foil to the black leads of their respective movie and show. In a cultural sense, Remick and the Sinners crew have faced similar circumstances. The colonization of their ancestors, the anglicization of their names and languages, the forced religious conversion, much like Lestat and Louis shared queerness. But race transcends all of that. That makes the whole proposal of vampirism that much more striking because, wed or not, they were never truly going to be equal. When we meet Smoke and Stack, we immediately know that their status in the South is atypical. They wear suits and pay people by the second to watch their belongings. They're clear outliers in the Mississippi Delta. The same goes for Louis Dupont du Lac. All of them are successful/affluent black men in the South that face the constant threat of white hatred, but that threat is often masked with this bravado from those that they do business with. This great article written by Suba Senthil called The Black Vampire, Fashion Icon and Capitalist highlights the plights of Louis and how he traverses through the world. In it, Senthil talks about the interactions Louis faces as a black businessman whose status is rather exceptional in Storyville and incorporates how his style reflects his story. It's a great read, and I'll leave it in the description if you're interested in checking it out. Senthil writes, quote, "In the opening scene of Louis' first flashback, a white alderman calls him the N-word, only to realize moments after,
Oh, Pond-du-Lac. Oh, forgive me. There's so much wine.
His apology here is not culpability for his racism, but rather that he's sorry for saying that to Louis, a man of some status in the town of Storyville. Cynthia goes on to say, in another scene, Louis has a conversation with the white businessman in the quarter who unceremoniously tells him,
Now, I must say I had my doubts, but you really have earned your 15%.
You truly are an exceptional Negro.
Louis' response to the exceptional Negro comment brings out one of my favorite scenes and lines of the show.
I have powers now and decades of rage to process, and it was both random and unfortunate the man picked that night to dabble in fuckery.
That is a prime example of the power that Louis gained as a vampire, but still clearly lacked autonomously. His existence still hinged on how he was perceived by the white businessmen of Storyville. If they didn't consider him exceptional, they would immediately dismiss him, or worse, put him in his place for daring to defy what was expected of him as a black man. The same goes for Smoke and Stack when they return to the Delta. When they purchase the juke joint, the white landowner that sells it to them refers to the twins as boys, in which they rebuff by saying,
Ain't no boys here. I just grown men. With grown men money and grown men bullets.
On the surface, it's a clear power play, but as the story progresses, we learn that the landowner is a part of the clan, and that surface level power play is literally just the outermost layer of his rampant racism. Sinners is indeed a horror movie, and outside of the gore and violence, I think that the suspended tension that ripples throughout the film is what makes it truly terrifying. We as audience members know the history of Black-owned American businesses in the early 20th century, and the way that Ryan Coogler manages to weave truth of history and folklore into a tapestry of the Black experience is simply stunning. So for both the Smokestack twins and for Louis Dupont-Dulac, their status and Blackness makes them a target of white disdain and disrespect. This is a little off topic, but Louis and Lestat's relationship explores this in a really interesting way because Lestat isn't flat out racist. He's gleefully ignorant, kind of in the same way that Remick is. There's a scene where Louis kills and eats the same guy that called him an exceptional Negro, and instead of being understanding, Lestat berates Louis and calls him fledgling, not for the first time, might I add. Lestat's unwillingness to genuinely empathize with Louis' plight leads to this scene.
Yo, you need to show restraint, fledgling. Oh, you need to stop using that word right now, because it sounds a little like slave. Well, that's what it fucking sound like. It's what it feel like sometimes.
And to that I say, clock it. This might be a strange parallel, but to me, it's comparable to the final scene between Sammy and Remick. When Sammy's on the verge of being turned, he begins to recite the Lord's Prayer. It's a layered gesture. He's attempting to atone before his death. He's calling out to his father in a way. He's finding comfort in the very words that were violently forced upon his ancestors. And he does it all while holding on to his guitar. Remick joins in, but his recitation is mocking. He simultaneously waterboards Sammy in this really ruinous version of a baptism while saying it, and echoes the comfort that Sammy feels from the words, but it lacks sincerity because Remick still wants Sammy for himself. He recognizes their similarities and capitalizes on them through an inverted sort of empathy, just like Lestat. I mean, shoot, you could argue that the very reason why Remick and Lestat sought out their respective counterparts was due to their Blackness. Sammy's music, by proxy of his race and culture, allowed him to summon his people via the blues, which is literally how Remick found him. Lestat became infatuated with Louis after witnessing him engaged in a hypermasculine display of violence, something that Louis felt as though he had to do as a Black business owner in order to keep his image up. It's just a super interesting parallel to me. The Smokestack twins are already cognizant of the fact that their business is likely to be targeted and briefly mention a chest of weapons that they meant to bring in case things popped off. At the very end of the movie, after Stack's been turned and Remick's been killed, Smoke retrieves the chest and he uses the guns inside to kill the Klansmen that attempt to ambush the juke joint. In the process, he's mortally wounded. And you know what? I feel like everybody expected him to be fine because, yay, the hero prevails. But no, he dies, and I vividly recall the couple next to me gasping when Smoke dropped to the ground and saw Annie and their baby. At first, I was a little bothered by the decision to have him die, because it felt like, man, we got this far and for what? But then I remembered an episode of Interview with the Vampire, episode 3, and it made me reanalyze my feelings. In episode 3 of season 1, Louis discovers that the white elite of Storyville had a ploy to take properties from black business owners. If you've ever seen this clip, yes, this is that episode. One of these elites was this dude named Fenwick, and Finn would like to try to keep Louis on a leash while he played God. Well, one night, Louis decides that he's had enough of the tomfoolery and he kills him. Like, literally mutilates him and hangs Fenwick's corpse up in the town square and hangs a white only sign on him. This scene is very much so a sister scene to the one in Sinners where Smoke is killing the Klansmen. And it's interesting because in an interview with the vampire, we actually see the consequences of Louis' actions. Directly after Louis makes an example out of Fenwick, a white mob retaliates by burning down black homes and businesses, killing I don't know how many people and literally eviscerating an entire neighborhood. Louis is devastated by it, and Lestat notably is not, and he muses that they should make the day their anniversary because it's the date that Louis truly embraces his vampirism. And Louis takes to the streets in order to help whoever he can. Through that, he finds Claudia, his daughter/sister. Their relationship and how she plays a role in the racial dynamic specifically between her, Louis, and Lestat is like a 200,000 million word essay in itself. So I'll spare y'all from that. But in remembering this and how rooted in history both Sinners and Interview with the Vampire are, I'm happy that Smoke died because he would have been subjected to the exact same thing that the black folk in Storyville were subjected to after Louis killed that alderman. Black rage, no matter how warranted, will always be punished. Louis, despite his vampirism, still suffered at the hand of systematic racism, and when he did try to exercise that newfound supernatural power, the repercussions fell on the heads of the mortal members of his community. After Smoke dies, we don't see the fallout because nobody remains in the Delta. Sammy leaves with his guitar, Stack and Mary run off to wherever, and the rest of the crew have died. But history is a flat circle, and we all know what happened in that Mississippi town after the sun went down. So yeah, I hope this video made sense. I always feel like I'm spewing out like an unintelligible stream of consciousness whenever I make these, but you know, what can you do? That's basically what I'm doing though. There's plenty more parallels here, but I decided to focus on just a few, lest this video be 17 hours long. But please let me know what y'all think about Interview with the Vampire and Sinners being media siblings, because I'm far from the first person to point out their similarities. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see y'all around.